Hello there. You know, the last time I made a video talking about the Endgame and Genshin Impact, it was about 6 months ago now. I'm sure a lot of you didn't even realize it had been that long, but trust me, I've been counting every painful minute. I said a lot of things in that video, and if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to go watch it. It's not 100% necessary, but you might be a little lost if I reference it. That being said, I made that video around the release of Natlan, and at that time, the Spiral Abyss actually wasn't that bad. It had mostly petered out into a even sync of about 2.8 million health per Spiral Abyss. It was relatively easy to get yourself in there with a pretty well built team, get in, you get out, 20-minute adventure, 36 stars, and move on with your life. You might have a rough day every now and again, require more than 10% of your brain, you might actually have to open one of your eyes this time, but you know, is what it is. That is not the case anymore. You see, for the longest time in Genshin Impact, the Spiral Abyss has had a tendency to draw from mechanics of whatever the current region in the game is. We've seen this a lot with, for example, Sumeru, encouraging you to have a lot of Dendro reactions, or Dendro team, or you need to apply Dendro to this enemy to weaken them, like for example, the Jade Bloom Terror Shroom. We saw this back in Inazuma, with the heavy emphasis put on energy recharge in the region, and the new High Tide Low Tide Abyss, which to this day is some of the most painful shit ever made. And even after that, we had the Corruption and Corrosion Abysses, which, for those of you that weren't playing 4 years ago, be lucky you didn't have to deal with that bullshit. Even all the way back in Genshin Impact version 1.0, when Venti and Mondstadt and CC was a huge deal, the old veteran players still quiver in their boots at the memory and the terror of what they experienced on floor 1112, having to protect that godforsaken totem lest their 36-star clear crumble to ash along with it. And while it might not be anything new, I just want to go out and say it. Natlan mechanics in the Spiral Abyss are some of the most painfully insufferable things I've ever had to deal with. And that is coming from somebody who currently has every single Natlan character aside from Chaska, so I can only imagine what it's like for somebody who doesn't have the characters. But before we continue, it's time to pay my editors. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a cheap guy. I like to save as much of my money as I possibly can, and that really doesn't line up well with gacha games. For that reason, when I decide it's time to spend money, I use LootBar.gg. LootBar.gg is a top-up service which allows you to get up to a 25% discount on all Genshin items. And in addition to that, new users are also given an additional 10% off coupon for their first purchase, allowing you to save more of your hard-earned money. All you need to do is head to the website, select the game you want to make your purchase in, insert your appropriate UID and region, and then make your purchase. And with a variety of payment methods, you can ensure that your payment is secure through something like PayPal. And with its many collaborations with other content creators and its glowing reviews, you can be ensured that your method of purchase is very reliable. So what are you waiting for? Click the link down in my comment section and description, and if you're a new user, you'll receive a 10% discount on your first order. And with that all being said, let's get back into the video. Because you see, when Natlan came out, they decided they were going to introduce this lovely new mechanic called Night Soul Blessing State, which essentially puts a character in their elemental skill or elemental burst state in a period of time where they can consume a new currency that will empower them in some way, shape, or form. Well, it turns out that the consumption of Night Soul not only affects you, but it affects the enemies you're fighting. We can see this with the Way Cubs, who generate a massive shield that then gets destroyed once you hit them with Night Soul points. Or you can see it in the elite purple glob enemies whose name I can't be bothered to remember right now. This makes it so that if you want to actually counter these enemies, you are going to need to bring in Night Soul characters to make it significantly less intensive on your account. Now, while it is possible to do it without them, you would need such an absolutely massive amount of elemental application to break the shield, it's probably not worth it as you're going to chew into your abyss time. And the devs clearly knew this was going to be a problem because they waited all the way until now to make it a heavy focus of the Spiral Abyss. Now that Natlan's been out for about half a year, they're introducing more and more mechanics and more enemies into the Spiral Abyss that require you to bring in Night Soul characters, which is an issue because most people didn't really pull a lot of the Natlan characters. Now, there are a couple of exceptions like Setlali, Zillanen, and Mavwika. They're really not enough because most enemies that have a Night Soul shield, if you want to destroy them, you're gonna need 2 characters. And this is a problem because if you're not not paying for one of the 7 premium Natlan characters, or if you only get Varessa, who for some reason can destroy an entire shield by herself in 2 seconds, you're going to have a lot of problems. This is because a significant majority of the enemies want you to have at least 2 Natlan characters to comfortably clear it, meaning you're going to need 4 of them total if each side requires you to bring in a Natlan unit. And that really sucks. Players don't want to deal with that. We've seen the same complaints come from previous Abysses, for example, pretty much any Abyss that has a Lector in it. But if you were playing all the way back in version 1.4 when the Abyss Lector got introduced, then there's a high likelihood you know exactly what I'm talking about. Players don't like these gimmicky kinds of shields. They just add artificial difficulty. Making it to where I'm not able to actually damage the enemy is not fun. That is lame. It's like the equivalent of making an enemy that has 20 seconds where they're completely invulnerable, or they fly around in the sky and become completely unhittable if you're not one of the 3 worst DPS characters in the game. But you know what? I can deal with the gimmicks. I can deal with the gimmicks pretty easily, actually. But what I don't care for is the HP bloat. For those of you that don't know, in my last video, I made a comment about how in version 5.0, a significant amount of the elite enemies in the Spiral Abyss had around 450,000 health, meaning a Knich that was pretty well built in that Spiral Abyss would have easily been able to one-shot them. Even boss enemies weren't that much stronger. They only ended up having around 1.1 to 1.5 million health if they were an especially bulky breed. Okay, well nowadays, in the Spiral Abyss, you will find that most elite enemies hover around the 800,000 range, and a lot of the bosses are getting up there in the 2 to 3 million range, and that is in 6 months, 7 months even, and that's lame. Players don't want to deal with an absolutely massive amount of health bloat for literally no reason. It's getting to the point now where a lot of older team comps are starting to show their age, which means unfortunately I'm gonna have to put my boy Xiao up on the shelf because there's really no way I can use him because most of his teams don't require Night Soul unless I bottleneck it in there somehow. We're also beginning to see a phase out of a lot of older, more powerful characters. For example, there's been a lot more elemental shields in the Spiral Abyss recently, which I see as a specific target on Neuvillette, whose best teams can't really efficiently break elemental shields. And if that wasn't a target on Neuvillette, then putting the Hydro Pupa in Spiral Abyss definitely was. The devs were probably in their offices cackling to themselves when they decided that was a good idea, because let's face it, the devs hate it when any one character is meta for an extended period of time because it loses them money. So now they have derived this new fun tactic where they can release a regional gimmick and regional enemies that benefit off of a regional system that all need to be in Abyss at the same time in order to siphon as much money out of you as possible. And that's really lame because Spiral Abyss used to be the only real place where you could test the limits of your characters. Because let's face it, Genshin is an easy game. Like I said, the Abyss sucks. You know, it's challenging for those of you that haven't been playing the game for 5 years like me, but I'm sitting here with my eyes closed waiting for the time I can finally open one lid again. I go to the Spiral Abyss so that I can test out my characters. And now I can't even do that because a significant portion of the enemies have elemental immunity, elemental shields, Night Soul blessing states, making it to where anything that's not exactly what they want you to use is rendered completely obsolete. And all of this is without even talking about the newest Endgame. The Imaginarium Theater is clearly something that was only made for long-time players who have nowhere else to use some of their more underpowered units. Because that's all it is to me. There is absolutely no realistic scenario where I'm going to willingly bring Candace into any difficult content, but you will see me bring Candace into the Imaginarium Theater because it is such a low bar that I am completely willing to bring in that underpowered unit. And it is so obvious that this is who it's catered to because if you don't have X amount of characters, congratulations my friend, you can't participate. Now, for those of you with more than 2 brain cells to rub together, you probably immediately realize the issue there. What happens if the new Imaginarium Theater rotation is on a lovely system where I need to bring in Geo characters, Hydro characters, and Cryo characters? Well, you're kinda gonna be fucked because Geo characters are notoriously underpowered, so nobody really pulls them. Cryo characters haven't run for a year, and Hydro characters are some of the rarest characters in the game having the least amount of representatives. initiatives. Sounds like a nightmare, doesn't it? Yeah, well, that happened. One of the more recent Imaginarium Theaters was Cryo Hydro Geo. Did you spend God knows how many hours hyper-investing one 5-star to C6 instead of getting multiple 5-stars? Ooh, sorry. Guess you can't play the new in-game mode. It's not even fair to call it that. It's so much easier than Spiral Abyss, it's not even funny. You can get a massive amount of buffs and just plow your way through the whole thing. I don't even understand what the point was of throwing on a character limit when it's fully possible to clear the whole thing with only the characters it gives you at the start. But it doesn't matter if you can do that because you're not allowed to actually start the rotation unless you have enough characters to fill up the entire bar. God forbid there be any skill expression whatsoever in the new Genshin Impact in-game mode. And you know what? The cherry on top is, this in-game mode basically fractionized the rewards you get from in-game, because when it came out, it increased the cooldown time on the Spiral Abyss. If you were able to clear the Spiral Abyss before with your 2 really overpowered teams, you were able to get a decent amount of pulls every month, about 10 pulls a month, which means you'd get about 120 pulls a year. That's not terrible, especially because it takes such an inconsequential amount of time, but congratulations. With the introduction of the new Imaginarium Theater, you are going to have to put in not only 8 characters worth of work, no, 24 characters need to be built and ready to run before you can even start. And how many more rewards do you get if you can clear both of them in the month? The same. Congratulations, friend. You get to put in even more work for less rewards. Isn't that awesome? Don't you just love that? All's that to say is, I really don't like Genshin's endgame. It feels slow, boring, not really worth my time, and 9 times out of 10, it's not even difficult. I just need to bring in whatever new shiny character counters the enemies of that abyss. It's getting to the point where I'm just gonna not do it, because why would I? I don't get anything out of it. And I'm sure a lot of people feel the same. And it only seems to be getting worse over time as more power creep becomes an issue. So, that all being said, probably just not gonna do it anymore. And I recommend you do the same. But if you are struggling, make sure you pull Mavuika, okay buddy? It'll make it a lot easier. Yeah, but that's it. I'm done yapping now. Like, comment, subscribe, especially if you're a returning viewer, might as well. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace, peace.